Good morning, everyone. When I was doing some reading about what I'm going to speak on today, there's a word we're going to be looking at, and one of the people that I was reading, he said that this word gives us staying power for life. How many people want staying power for life? I think we could all probably put our hands up for that, wouldn't we? Because life can be good, it can be bad, it can be indifferent, it can be wonky, it can be weird, it can be strange. I think we've got all of those right now. But we all need staying power for life. And we're going to be looking at a psalm today. I know I preach on psalms a lot. I read psalms a lot, which is why I end up preaching on them a lot. But today we're going to do it a bit different. If you could get it up for me, Andy, please. We're going to do it how it was done when they read these in the temple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first line, and I want a bit of congregational response. So I'm going to read the first line, and I want everyone to read the second line back to me. We'll declare it out, and we'll go through the 26 verses like this. If you've got your Bibles, please turn with it, but please also read from here, because there are lots of different translations of this, and I'll explain why that is later on, okay? So we're going to start Psalm 136, and we're reading verse 1. This is the English Standard Version, by the way. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Give thanks to the God of gods. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. To him who alone does great wonders. To him who by understanding made the heavens. To him who spread out the earth above the waters. To him who made the great lights. The sun to rule over the day. The moon and stars to rule over the night. To him who struck down the firstborn of Egypt. And brought Israel out from among them. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm. To him who parted the Red Sea in two. And made Israel pass through the midst of it. But overthrew Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea. To him who led his people through the wilderness. To him who struck down great kings. And killed mighty kings. Sihon, king of the Amorites. And Og, king of Bashan. And gave their land as a heritage. A heritage to Israel, his servant. It is he who remembered us in our low estate. And rescued us from our foes. He who gives food to all flesh. Give thanks to the God of heaven. That psalm is known as the Great Hallel. I wonder if there's any people here, this is no judgment because I've done this myself, just sort of think, I wish we could just say that his steadfast love forever once, and then we can just read the psalm and get on with it. I bet there are some people thinking that. I've done it myself. But I mentioned about someone talking about staying power for life. And staying power for life is found in that sentence. His steadfast love endures forever. And it's that phrase, steadfast love. It's translated steadfast love in the ESV. In the NIV, they just translate it as love. In the Common Jewish Bible, it's translated as grace. In the King James, it's translated as his mercy. In fact, they translate this word 15 different ways in the King James Version, because there is no word that is sufficient in English to actually encapsulate everything that the Hebrew word says. In the New American Standard, it says his loving kindness. And in the Young's Literal Translation, it just says his kindness. So what is the word? It's the word hesed, and I've actually spoken on it a goodly while ago. But I want to look at it again and look at it in how it helped the people of Israel back in the day and how it can help us today as well. And one writer said that hesed is wrapping up in itself all the positive attributes of God: love, covenant faithfulness, mercy, grace, kindness, loyalty. All of those things are in that one short Hebrew word. It's so full that we don't have an English word that can actually even begin to get close to what it actually means. But it's never an abstract feeling. It always entails actions. And as we read out from Psalm 136, we see many, many different examples of God's hesed, his love, his loving kindness, his mercy. And I wonder whether Paul was thinking of this word when he was writing in the Romans. He wrote to Romans in chapter 5 and verse 8. He says, God demonstrates his love for us. It's not just a thinking word, it's a doing word. God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I wonder if Paul was thinking about hesed. And for those who like a little bit of poetry, that word endures forever. It's not everlasting in that sense. It's just a foreverness that it's kind of out of time completely. It's a kind of time that has no horizon. And if you think about the horizon, we can see as far as the horizon, can't we? And when we walk to it, we never get to it, do we? Because the horizon always moves. When we move, it moves with us. So we can be up a mountain and we've got a horizon, but then we can be somewhere else and we've got a different horizon, and we can walk towards the horizon, but we never reach it. And that's the same sort of idea of God's love and his mercy and his kindness towards us. It's something that we cannot get to the end of. And I think there are people here today that probably, and I've needed it in my time as well, we need to hear that we have a God who loves us absolutely unconditionally with everything in his being. He loves us. It's his hesed. So we're going to look briefly at the actual psalm itself and see that it's divided into various sections. And then we're going to look at what that meant for Israel and what it can mean for us. And also we're going to have a bit of a look at how the psalm was used actually in the Bible itself, because that can give us an idea of how we can use the psalms. They're not just poetry that was written thousands of years ago. They are prayers that support us in our spiritual life today. Okay, so always a good place to start, the goodness of God, verse 1. That's where it starts. So verse 1 to 3 is pretty much scene setting. It's telling us that God is good and that he's God above all and he's Lord above all. So there is no one that compares with our God. None whatsoever. So that's his starting point. And then he goes on and he talks about, in verse 4, that the person who wrote this says that God alone is one who does great wonders. And if you like, the rest of the psalm could be writing out all the different wonders that Israel as a people have seen God perform for them. So we see, first of all, we see his work in creation. And that is for all of us. We live, whether we believe it or not, we live in a created world that God created for us. That was one of his great wonders that he did. He spoke things into being. Out of nothing, he spoke things into being. It doesn't list all the creation events. It just talks about spreading out the earth. It talks about the waters being parted, and it talks about the great lights being made, the moon and the stars. But there's enough there to remind people that God has made the whole of earth and everything within it. And that is done. Why is that done? Because his steadfast love endures forever. It springs from God's very being, who he is, that he's good, and that he's merciful, and that he's kind, and that he's faithful. And then we've got verse 10 through to 16, and this is the story of Israel's redemption from slavery in Egypt. Now, I know a lot of people, when I do, I help run the Living God's Way course, and there are people on there that haven't been Christians for long, and so it's really good because it freshens you up and it makes you see things from a different angle. We had a really funny discussion the other day about what we should take literally and what we shouldn't take literally. Because one person thought that actually when Jesus said that you should gouge your eye out if it leads you to temptation, you should take that literally. And then we were talking about Jesus' brothers, and she thought that wasn't literal. and that he didn't, he had brothers after he was born, so, and it's really funny, so it's good. But when you read something about God killing the firstborn in Egypt, you think, gosh, that sounds really brutal. Really, really brutal. Until you read at the beginning of Exodus that Pharaoh actually said that every male child that was born, everyone should die. They should get thrown into the Nile. So what God was doing was actually less than what Pharaoh was doing. So we need to understand when we see something in the Bible that we think, gosh, that's really brutal, there's a reason for it. God doesn't do things because he's nasty or capricious. He does things for a reason. And for that, he wanted to get Pharaoh's attention and get Pharaoh to actually let his people go. So he does. Eventually, we read that in Exodus, that he lets the people go, and Israel is redeemed from slavery. And we see after that in verse 13 and 14, we see that he divided the Red Sea so that they could walk right through it. We sang that this morning, didn't we? Oh, we were singing it metaphorically, that's what he does for us when we face difficulties. God parts the seas and we can walk through it. This was 2 to 3 million people walking through that sea, where it was split and they walked across on dry ground. That must have been something to see. Something to see. And why did he do it? He did it because his steadfast love endures forever. And he was in relationship with the people of Israel. And you know what? Dividing the sea for 2 million people or 3 million people to walk through, that was a piece of cake once he'd already divided all the waters and spoke everything into being. So, that to God, he's like, hey, you think that's clever? You should have seen what I did when I created the whole place. So we see his redemption of his people. And in verses 17 through to 25, we see God's provision for his people. He didn't just take them out of Egypt and leave them stuck in the wilderness. He gave them a land. And again, you can see when it says that it talks about Sihon and Og. Now, there were lots of kings in the Canaanite region at this point in time, maybe up to 30. And God told them to actually kill them all. They killed the men, women, and children. And you think, when you read about it, you think, gosh, that's awful as well, isn't it? That's awful as well. But when we read, Sihon was the king of the Amorites. And when we read back into why God said to kill them all, he said to do that because he says in Abraham, remember the ancestor of the Israelites, he said to them, I'm giving you this land, but you can't have it yet because their evil isn't fully complete. God knew that they were an evil people, but they weren't bad enough at that point in time with Abraham for him to judge them and punish them and obliterate them. But by the time that Israel gets there, these people, they weren't just violent, they weren't just committing sexual offences, they were sacrificing their own children to the gods. God saw that as utterly despicable. So you can say, it's awful that he wiped this nation out. He wiped it out for a purpose because they were evil in what they said and what they did as a nation. Now, Og was a giant. They say in the Bible that his bed was 17 feet long and 6 foot wide. And we can read that and we can think, do you know what? Is that a bit of a, is it literally true? But do you know what? There were lots of people, lots of other peoples around Israel at the time that talk about giants. There were giants that lived there. There was a race of people that they actually reckoned were between 7 foot and 10 foot. Now I used to be 5'4". Now I'm getting older. I'm not probably quite there anymore. So, 7 foot to me, I'm sort of like looking below their armpits. So 10 foot, I've got neck ache because I can't actually see their faces at all. So he had 60 cities, Og, 60 cities that had high walls and gates and bars. And yet God defeated them. And he sent the Israelites out. He said, go, I'm going to be with you. And why did he do that? Because his steadfast love was with Israel. So they're with Israel as a nation, but also as individuals. 23 to 25, I read this. It is he who remembers us in our low estate and rescued us from our foes. It is he who gives food to all flesh. It's not just a homogenous group of people. God sees the individual and he provides for the individual because of his great love for them. So we can use Israel and that example there and God's faithfulness to the people of Israel during their walks in the wilderness and when they conquered the land. We can use that as a spur to go on. The Israelites used it as a spur. They read this psalm, we'll see it later on, but they read this psalm at certain points in their history to remind them of what God had done for them in the past, not just to stay in the past, but to remind them that he was faithful and he would be with them in the future as well. And that's the same for us. In 21st century Britain, in Congleton or Kidsgrove or Biddulph or Sandbach or Alsage or wherever you come from, God is with us. And he's a faithful covenant God who shows his steadfast love to us all the time. He has redeemed us. He's still God. We live in the world he created. He redeemed us. We weren't in slavery to Egypt, but we were in slavery to sin before he set us free. He provides for us. He helps us to conquer giants in our lives. All of us at some point or another have conquered giants in our lives. Things whether they've been a seemingly impossible physical situation, whether it seems like a temptation that always brings us down and that we can never get over. He gives us the tools to conquer those giants in our lives if we keep our focus on him and remember his hesed, his love, his mercy, his grace toward us. Because, throughout that history of Israel that's listed in this psalm, it wasn't that he redeemed them and everything was hunky-dory and they walked with him and they've continued to walk with him ever since. They did some amazingly awful things. Just after they'd seen that incredible thing where the Red Sea had parted and they'd got through and the Egyptians hadn't, an amazing miracle that you would absolutely think would be seared on their minds, that God was the only God. They didn't have Moses for 40 days and they decided to make a golden calf and bow down and worship it. 40 days. Less than 6 weeks. And we can be like that. We can be like that. We can slip, we can fall, we can rebel, we can not obey. But God's perfect love, steadfast love that endures forever, was with Israel, and it remains with us. We just need to not keep sinning. He is with us. He is with us. And he will be with us till the end, cheering us on. So I'm going to look at some of the uses of Psalm 136. We're not going to read that. I'm not going to get to turn to them because there's quite a few. But in Chronicles, we read about David when he brings the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem. And it'd been taken wrongly. It had been taken by the tabernacle, out of the tabernacle, and it'd been taken by people when they went to fight. And it shouldn't have been done that. And they took it, and David brings the ark back. Eventually, he brings the ark back into Jerusalem, and he sings a song of thanks that the ark is back. The ark, remember, symbolized God's presence. And he sang a song of thanks, which says this: "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good." What? For his steadfast love endures forever. That's what they sang when God's presence, the ark, came back. When the ark was brought into the temple that Solomon had made for God so that people could worship, they sang, "For he is good." For what? His steadfast love endures forever. And what happened then? The cloud of God's presence filled that place, and it says the priests couldn't minister there. There is something powerful in these words. We need to have them in our lives. I think a lot of people know the story of Jehoshaphat, don't they? Jehoshaphat was a king in Jerusalem, in Judah rather, at that point, and he'd done something that he shouldn't have done, and 3 kings were lined up against him, 3 peoples, and it was a massive army. And he comes to God in prayer, because they were very small by this point. A lot of the land had been lost to the land of Israel. They were very small, and Jehoshaphat comes before God and says, "Please, won't you help us?" And God says, "Yep, I'll help you. Go out before them, and I'll go before you. You don't need to worry." So we know, don't we? I think a lot of us know the story, that they sent the musicians out in front. They positioned themselves where God told them to position themselves, and they sent the musicians out in front. And this is 2 Chronicles 20 and verse 21. And this is what they were singing: "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever." And it says in verse 22, "When they began to sing to the Lord worked on their behalf, and their enemies fought each other." When they sang out these words, his steadfast love endures forever, God started to work for them, because it reminded him of his covenant, faithful love that he had with Israel. And when we are in trouble, we can say to God, "Won't you help me, please? Because I believe that your steadfast love endures forever in my life. Your grace, your mercy will get me through this." And God will work on our behalf. In Ezra, when they eventually, Judah and Israel were exiled, and they come back eventually, and Ezra was a scribe who wrote down what was happening at that time. And when the temple had been destroyed, but they were rebuilding it, and when they were rededicating the temple, what did they sing? "For he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever towards Israel." You know, they did it on high days and holidays. They did it in trouble. They did it all the time. When they needed help, They sang out to God, your steadfast love. They reminded the God of his faithfulness. Your steadfast love endures forever. And Chronicles, when we talk about, I spoke earlier about David when it was used there. There is actually some suggestion in there that actually when David said that he set the priests to minister day and night, that's the sacrifices morning and night. Some scholars actually think that part of that was that they read this psalm morning and night. Interesting one, isn't it? When Jesus had his last supper with his disciples, Judas had gone out to betray him. They ate a meal. He'd washed their feet. He'd told them all these things that were happening. And at the end of Mark, it says that when they had sung a hymn, they got up and they went out and they left that place and they went to the place of Gethsemane. What was the hymn they sang? It was this one, Psalm 136. That was the psalm that by this point in time, Jews sang at every Passover meal. So when Jesus hung on the cross, I think Jesus was remembering that the steadfast love of the Lord endures forever. Amen. I think he was. If it works in those situations, gosh, can it work in ours? Yeah? But like I said with Israel went wrong sometimes, but God stayed with them. We go wrong sometimes, but God will stay with us. He's faithful. He loves us. He is committed to us. But there's another time, a famous time in church history, when this psalm was read. And now, I'm as a historian, I like anything to do with history. So if you're not into history, you have my permission to switch off for a couple of minutes, okay? Athanasius. Athanasius is one of my heroes. He was at the Council of Nicaea in 325, and he was one of the scribes there, and he wrote down what was happening, and he signed his name to the Nicene Creed. And but the thing was, what happened was there were a group of people that were trying to deny that Jesus was fully God. And there was a guy called Arius, and it was called the Arian controversy. And the Council of Nicaea was to try and resolve this controversy. Now, if you think that theology doesn't matter, the second to last song that we sang, What a Beautiful Name It Is, that song we would not have if it wasn't for Athanasius. Yeah? Because he stood when all the others were willing to fudge about who Jesus was and about his relationship to the Father. He stood and said, Jesus is exactly the same as the Father. He has the same substance as the Father. A lot of them wanted to say that he was like the Father or similar to the Father. And Athanasius absolutely said, no, he is exactly like the Father. And he needs to be like the Father because otherwise the theology, Christianity does not work unless Jesus is fully God. It doesn't work. And so Athanasius stood his ground. And there was a saying at the time of Athanasius against the world. Now, some people admired him for his tenacity. Other people hated him for his intransigence. But he hung on to the truth when the truth needed hanging on to. And it cost him dearly in his life. There was a time in 356, he'd been bishop in Alexandria for a period of time now, and there was a time where the emperor wanted to get rid of him because actually he'd called Athanasius back, but Athanasius wouldn't worship the pagan gods, and so the Emperor Julian wanted to get rid of him. And he sends his general and his armies to the church where Athanasius is, to arrest him and send him into exile. And what did Athanasius tell the church to read at that point in time? There's an army outside the church, and they say this psalm back to one another. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Now, I wish I could tell you that Athanasius got away and it was all fantastic. He did get away, but he was in exile in the desert for 6 years after that. And so he didn't have a good life. But but in that 6 years, he wrote a huge number of letters and treasts that all gradually fought against this idea that Jesus wasn't fully God. And if he hadn't been in exile, if he'd been running a busy church in Alexandria and all the churches, supporting all the churches, would he have had time to sit and ponder and to consider how he could write things so that people could grasp how important this was? So rescue doesn't always look like what we expect it to. But God rescues his people. When we rely on the steadfast love of God, never ceasing, he will not let us get down. He will not let us down. If we're doing things wrong in our lives that we know we're doing right now, we need to stop it. We need to say, I'm sorry, God. I believe that your love is for me. Your hesed is for me. You want me to live the way that you want me to. And he will rescue us. It might not look like what we want to. You know, in Israel, they didn't expect when God brought them out of slavery in Egypt that they were going to have to fight giants that were between 7 and 10 feet tall. But that's what God wanted for them because he knew it would be good for them. We can use this psalm as a prayer in our lives when we're facing difficulties. We can use it in fantastic periods. We can use it in our everyday lives. But what's so important is, rather than skipping that phrase, his steadfast love endures forever. Let's build up to a crescendo. Let it resonate in us. And let us really understand that God is for us. And it will help us see him face to face. And I just think that's just such an amazing psalm that it's been used. Jesus used it when he was going to the cross. What an amazing thing. Let's be blessed by what the word has for us. And let's read it and ingest it and understand God's for us. Amen.